In the heart of a bustling city, surrounded by towering buildings and cobblestone streets, stood an iconic landmark that drew visitors from every corner of the globe. It was a grand palace, its golden spires glinting under the sunlight, exuding history and majesty. The air buzzed with excitement as tourists snapped pictures, marveled at the architecture, and whispered stories about the kings and queens who once walked its halls. But what truly captured everyone's attention were the royal guardsmen stationed outside. Stoic figures dressed in striking crimson uniforms and towering bearskin hats. Among these sentinels was Corporal James Calloway, a man whose presence commanded respect without him uttering a single word. At 28 years old, he had spent nearly a decade perfecting his role as one of the palace's guardians. Every morning, he donned his uniform with pride, ensuring each button gleamed and every crease was sharp. To onlookers, he appeared larger than life, a symbol of tradition, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. Yet beneath the polished exterior lay a person shaped by years of training, sacrifice, and quiet introspection. James stood tall on the steps of the palace, his posture impeccable despite the hours ticking by. His gloved hands rested lightly on the hilt of his ceremonial sword, while his eyes scanned the crowd with practiced precision. Though his expression remained neutral, his mind often wandered to thoughts of home, family, or the countless lives tied to the legacy he represented. He knew people came not just to see the palace, but also to witness the guards, the living embodiment of centuries-old customs. Each day, he reminded himself of this responsibility, holding firm even when curiosity turned into mockery. Tourists gathered around him, pointing cameras and phones in his direction. Some posed for selfies, pretending to stand guard beside him, while others giggled nervously, unsure if they were allowed to approach. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking why the guards never moved or spoke. Parents hushed them gently, explaining it was part of the tradition. For most, the guards were fascinating, an almost mythical sight. But for a few, they became targets of playful teasing or outright ridicule. Despite the occasional jeers or silly antics aimed at breaking his composure, James never faltered. He understood that being a guardsman wasn't just about standing still. It was about representing something greater than himself. This mindset kept him grounded, even during moments when patience felt like a heavy burden. Still, deep down, he wondered how long he could endure such tests without letting emotion seep through his carefully constructed facade. Little did he know, today would push him further than ever before, and leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. The square hummed with energy as another wave of visitors arrived, eager to catch a glimpse of history. Among them, however, lurked someone determined to disrupt the solemnity of the scene. Unaware of what was about to unfold, James adjusted his stance slightly, preparing for yet another hour of silent vigilance. What happened next would challenge everything he believed about duty, respect, and human connection. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity as Corporal James Calloway stood motionless, his ceremonial cap lying on the ground beside him. The crowd held its collective breath, their eyes darting between the guard and the tourist who had crossed a line no one else dared to approach. For most of them, this was uncharted territory, a moment where tradition clashed with impulsiveness, where discipline faced defiance head-on. They expected shouting, anger, or perhaps even retaliation. After all, how could anyone endure such disrespect without reacting? But James wasn't like most people. Beneath his calm exterior, his mind raced with thoughts and emotions that threatened to break through his carefully maintained composure. He replayed the scene in his head, the mocking words, the deliberate knock of his cap, and felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him. It was about everything he wore on his shoulders every day. Honor, duty, respect. To react angrily would mean letting the man win, proving that his taunts had struck a nerve. But to stay silent risked appearing weak, indifferent, or complicit in his own humiliation. James took a slow, steadying breath, drawing strength from years of training. and countless hours spent preparing for moments exactly like this. His instructors had always emphasized the importance of restraint, reminding him that true power lay not in reaction but in control. "You are more than just a person," they'd said. "You represent something greater." Those words echoed in his mind now, grounding him when he needed it most. With deliberate care, James bent down at the waist, his movements precise and unhurried. He picked up his fallen cap, brushing away the faint smudge of dirt with the edge of his glove. Every action was measured, every gesture calculated to convey dignity rather than defeat. As he straightened back up and placed the cap firmly atop his head, the crowd seemed to exhale in unison. Some clutched their chests, visibly relieved, while others leaned forward, eager to see what would happen next. Finally, James turned his gaze toward the tourist. It wasn't a glare filled with rage or contempt, but a steady, unwavering look that demanded attention. The man flinched slightly under the weight of it, his earlier bravado crumbling into uncertainty. For the first time since stepping into the square, he appeared unsure of himself, as though he hadn't fully considered the consequences of his actions or the character of the man standing before him. "Sir," James began, his voice low but clear enough to carry over the murmurs of the crowd. The single word cut through the tension like a knife, silencing everyone instantly. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background. The tourist blinked, startled by the sudden address. He opened his mouth as if to speak but thought better of it, closing it again without uttering a sound. James continued, his tone firm but devoid of hostility. "You've traveled far to visit our country, haven't you?" The question caught the man off guard. It wasn't accusatory or confrontational. It was simple, almost conversational. Yet there was an undeniable authority behind it, a quiet confidence that commanded respect. The tourist hesitated, glancing around at the sea of faces watching him intently. Finally, he managed a weak reply. Yeah. Yes. I came here to see the sights." James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And I imagine you came hoping to learn something new, to experience something different. Am I right?" The man swallowed hard, nodding reluctantly. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than he had moments ago, when he was laughing and jeering. The tables had turned, and he knew it. In that brief exchange, James had shifted the dynamic entirely. What could have escalated into chaos became an opportunity, a chance to teach, to connect, to remind everyone present of the values he stood for. The crowd sensed it too, leaning in closer, hanging onto every word. No one wanted to miss what came next, least of all the tourist whose reckless act had set everything in motion. The air in the square was thick with anticipation as Corporal James Calloway's calm voice continued to resonate, cutting through the tension like a gentle breeze on a stifling day. His words weren't sharp or biting. Instead, they carried an unexpected warmth that disarmed not only the tourist, but also the crowd gathered around them. It was as though he had transformed the moment from one of conflict into something far more profound, an opportunity for understanding. "Sir," James said, his tone measured yet inviting, "our uniforms, our traditions, they may seem strange or even silly to outsiders. To some, we might look like relics of a bygone era, frozen in time while the world moves forward." He paused briefly, letting his words settle over the audience. The tourist shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado now replaced by a growing sense of unease. James gestured subtly toward his own attire. The crimson tunic, the gleaming buttons, the towering bearskin hat, as if inviting everyone to see beyond the surface. "But these symbols aren't just costumes," he explained. "They represent centuries of sacrifice, honor, and service. Every stitch in this uniform tells a story of battles fought, lives lost, and promises kept. When you knock my cap off, you're not just disrespecting me. You're showing disregard for everything we stand for." The crowd listened intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. Some nodded knowingly, while others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the truth in his words. Even the children who had been giggling moments ago fell silent, captivated by the gravity of the moment. The tourist, however, seemed to shrink under the weight of James's explanation. His face flushed red, and he fidgeted with the strap of his camera, avoiding eye contact. James didn't stop there. Instead of dwelling on the offense, he softened his tone further, turning the conversation inward. "I understand curiosity," he said, his voice tinged with empathy. "Perhaps your actions weren't meant to offend, but rather to provoke a reaction. To see if I'm truly human beneath this uniform." His piercing gaze locked onto the tourist once more, searching for sincerity. "Let me assure you, sir, I am human. And part of being human is choosing how to respond when tested." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, many nodding in agreement. Someone whispered, "What a remarkable man," while another added, "He's handling this so well." The atmosphere had shifted entirely, from hostility to reflection, from judgment to compassion. The tourist, visibly shaken, looked up at James with wide eyes, unsure of what to say. For the first time since arriving at the square, he appeared genuinely remorseful. James leaned slightly forward, not aggressively, but in a way that conveyed openness and connection. "Today, I choose kindness over anger," he continued, his voice steady and sincere. "Understanding over judgment. Because ultimately, isn't that what brings us together? Isn't that why people travel? To learn, to grow, to find common ground?" His word hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. The tourist blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to process the depth of James's response. Here was a man who could have easily reacted with anger or demanded punishment, yet he chose grace instead. It was a lesson not just for the provocateur, but for everyone watching. A reminder that humanity thrives when we prioritize empathy over ego. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, their hands clapping gently as if afraid to disturb the sanctity of the moment. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing James's poised demeanor and the tourist's humbled expression. Strangers patted each other on the back, sharing smiles and nods of approval. In that instant, the square felt less like a tourist destination and more like a gathering of souls united by a shared experience. For the tourist, the realization hit hard. He hadn't just encountered a guard. He had met someone willing to teach him a valuable lesson about respect, patience, and the power of choosing kindness. And as James stood tall once more, resuming his post with quiet dignity, it became clear that this moment would leave an indelible mark on everyone lucky enough to witness it. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the square, a new group of tourists arrived, their laughter ringing out like bells in the crisp air. They were an eclectic mix. Some wore casual clothes, others sported backpacks stuffed with travel essentials, and a few clutched guidebooks as if they held all the secrets of the world. Among them was a man who stood out not because of his appearance, but because of his demeanor. He had scruffy hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days, a faded leather jacket slung over his shoulder, and a camera dangling loosely from his neck. His eyes darted around the square, taking in the grandeur of the palace, but there was something restless about him, as though he couldn't settle into the awe that gripped everyone else. The man moved closer to Corporal James Calloway, his steps slow but deliberate. At first, he seemed like any other curious tourist, snapping photos and leaning in to read the plaque describing the history of the Royal Guardsman. But soon, his behavior took a different turn. He began muttering under his breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Look at them," he said with a smirk, gesturing toward the guards. "They're just standing there like statues. What's the point? Do they even move?" His tone carried a mix of mockery and disbelief, drawing uncomfortable glances from fellow visitors. A young couple standing near him exchanged uneasy looks. "Maybe they're supposed to be still," the woman whispered hesitantly. The man shrugged, unbothered by her comment. "Supposed to be? Come on, it's ridiculous," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. A few more people turned to look, sensing the tension building in the air. Undeterred, the man stepped even closer to James, tilting his head as if studying him like an exhibit in a museum. "Hey, buddy," he called out, though James remained motionless. "You ever get tired of standing there? Or are you some kind of robot?" His words drew nervous chuckles from a few onlookers, but most shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch what would happen next. Emboldened by the attention, the man grew bolder. He leaned in close, pretending to inspect James's uniform. "Wow, check out this hat," he remarked sarcastically, tapping the brim of his own imaginary cap. "What is this, a fashion show for bears?" More laughter rippled through the crowd, though it was tinged with unease. Something about his tone felt less playful and more provocative. Then, without warning, the man made his boldest move yet. As James stood rooted to his spot, the tourist reached out and deliberately knocked the ceremonial cap off his head. The sound of the cap hitting the ground echoed sharply through the square, followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. Cameras clicked wildly, capturing the shocking moment from every angle. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Did he really do that? Is he allowed to touch the guard? Oh no, what's going to happen now? For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The fallen cap lay inches away from James's polished boots, its pristine white surface now marred by a faint smudge of dirt. The tourist froze too, perhaps realizing the gravity of what he'd done. His earlier bravado faltered as he glanced around at the stunned faces surrounding him. The once amused crowd now watched with bated breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion of anger, or worse, intervention from authorities. But instead of reacting immediately, James remained eerily calm. His gaze never wavered, his posture stayed perfectly straight, and his expression betrayed nothing. Not anger, not frustration, not even surprise. It was as though the entire incident existed in a bubble, separate from him. Yet beneath the surface, his mind raced. He knew protocol demanded silence and restraint, but the deliberate act stung deeply. This wasn't just a harmless prank. It was a direct challenge to everything he represented. The square fell silent, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional click of a camera. All eyes were on James, waiting to see how, or if, he would respond. The tourist swallowed hard, suddenly aware that his actions might have consequences far beyond embarrassment. And in that charged moment, the stage was set for something extraordinary, a response that would leave everyone present speechless. The story of Corporal James Calloway and the tourist didn't fade into obscurity as days turned into weeks. Instead, it grew into something far greater, a timeless tale that transcended borders, cultures, and generations. People continued to share videos, articles, and personal reflections inspired by the incident, each adding their own layer of meaning to the narrative. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #KindnessOverAnger and #LessonsFromTheGuard, transforming what had started as a single moment in a city square into a global movement. For James, life returned to its usual rhythm after the initial wave of attention subsided. He remained steadfast in his duties, standing guard at the palace with the same quiet dignity that had earned him admiration worldwide. But there was a subtle change. He noticed more smiles from visitors, more respectful nods, and even heartfelt thank yous from strangers who recognized him. Children often waved enthusiastically, their parents explaining, "That's the guard who taught everyone about forgiveness." Though James never sought recognition, he couldn't deny the impact of that day. It reinforced his belief in the power of patience and compassion, reminding him why he had chosen this path in the first place. As for the tourist, the encounter became a turning point in his life. He returned home not just with souvenirs, but with a renewed perspective on how to navigate the world. At dinner tables, family gatherings, and work meetings, he recounted the story of the Guardsman who had responded to disrespect with grace. His wife, Sarah, joked that he told it so often she could recite it word for word, but deep down, she admired how profoundly it had shaped him. Their children, Emily and Jake, began mimicking James's calm demeanor during arguments, earning laughter and praise from relatives. Even Dad learned from someone better than himself, Emily proudly declared one evening, leaving her father beaming with pride. The tourist also kept his promise to spread the lesson he'd learned. During community events or casual conversations, he encouraged others to pause before reacting impulsively, to choose understanding over judgment. One particularly memorable instance occurred when he visited a local school to speak about travel and cultural exchange. As he recounted the story of the square, a young boy raised his hand hesitantly. "What if someone does something really bad to you?" the child asked. The tourist smiled gently. "Then you remember that your response defines you, not their actions. You can still choose kindness." Years passed, and the legacy of that day endured. Corporal James Calloway eventually rose through the ranks, becoming a mentor to younger guardsmen. He shared the story freely, emphasizing the importance of staying grounded in values even when tested. "Our uniforms are symbols of honor," he would say, "but true strength lies in how we treat others." His leadership inspired countless recruits, many of whom carried his philosophy into their own careers. Meanwhile, the tourist fulfilled another promise. He invited James to visit his hometown. Though years went by before schedules aligned, the reunion was worth the wait. When James finally arrived, he was greeted not just by the man and his family, but by an entire community eager to meet the guard who had touched lives across continents. Together, they organized a small gathering where James spoke about unity, respect, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The event ended with a group photo, James surrounded by smiling faces, his presence a testament to the ripple effect of compassion. Decades later, the story remained alive, not only in history books and online archives, but in the hearts of those who had heard it. Parents told it to their children as a bedtime story. Teachers used it to illustrate lessons on empathy, and travelers shared it as a reminder to approach new places and people with open minds. The square itself became a symbol of connection, attracting visitors eager to stand where two men had bridged divides through humility and understanding. In the end, both James and the tourist realized that their encounter had been more than just a fleeting moment. It was a spark that ignited something eternal. It proved that humanity thrives when we prioritize kindness over anger, wisdom over impulse, and unity over division. And though neither man sought fame or glory, they left behind a legacy far greater. A reminder that even in our most challenging moments, we have the power to choose compassion. And in doing so, we leave the world a little brighter than we found it. The silence that followed Corporal James Calloway's words was profound, almost sacred. It wasn't the kind of silence born out of boredom or indifference, but one filled with reflection. A collective pause, as if the entire square had been given permission to breathe deeply and think. The tourist stood frozen, his earlier cockiness completely evaporated. His shoulders slumped slightly, and his hands fidgeted nervously with the strap of his camera. For the first time since arriving at the palace, he seemed unsure of himself, as though he had stepped into unfamiliar territory, not geographically, but emotionally. James, sensing the man's vulnerability, took a small step forward, not enough to break protocol, but just enough to close some of the distance between them. His voice remained calm and steady, yet there was an undeniable warmth in it now. "Sir," he said gently, "I don't believe you came here today intending to cause harm. Maybe you were curious, maybe you wanted to test the limits of what I represent. But let me ask you this. Have you ever stopped to consider why we do what we do?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. The tourist blinked, caught off guard by the shift in tone. He opened his mouth to respond but hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, he muttered, I guess not." His voice was barely above a whisper, tinged with embarrassment and regret. James nodded slowly, as if expecting the answer. "That's okay," he replied, surprising everyone, including the tourist himself. Not everyone understands the weight of tradition or the sacrifices made to uphold it. And that's why you're here, to learn, to see things differently. He paused, allowing the man a moment to absorb his words before continuing. But disrespecting something you don't understand doesn't bring clarity. It only creates division. The crowd listened intently, their expressions softening as they watched the exchange unfold. A mother holding her child's hand whispered, "What a wise man," while an elderly gentleman nearby adjusted his glasses, visibly moved by the scene. Even those who hadn't spoken English fluently strained to catch every word, recognizing the universal language of compassion being spoken. James gestured subtly toward the palace behind him, its golden spires gleaming under the afternoon sun. "This place isn't just bricks and mortar," he explained. "It represents history, resilience, unity. And we, the Guards, are here to protect not just the building, but the ideals it stands for. Respect, honor, service. These aren't outdated concepts. They're timeless values that connect us all, no matter where we come from." His gaze returned to the tourist, locking onto him with a mix of firmness and kindness. "When you knocked my cap off, you weren't just challenging me personally. You were questioning the very foundation of what I stand for. But instead of reacting with anger, I chose to respond with understanding. Why? Because I believe in the power of connection over conflict." The tourist's face reddened further, tears welling up in his eyes. He looked down at his feet, unable to meet James's gaze any longer. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "I didn't mean. I didn't realize." He trailed off, struggling to articulate his feelings. Around him, the crowd leaned in, captivated by the raw sincerity of the moment. James offered a faint smile, one that conveyed both forgiveness and encouragement. "Apologies are meaningful when they come from the heart," he said softly. "And yours does seem genuine. So let's move forward together. Let's turn this moment into something positive, something worth remembering." With that, he extended a gloved hand, not in a gesture of superiority, but as an invitation to bridge the gap between them. The tourist hesitated for a split second before reaching out and shaking it firmly. The act felt symbolic, as though two worlds had collided and found common ground. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the handshake and the transformation taking place before their eyes. In that instant, something remarkable happened. The square, once buzzing with tension and judgment, became a space of unity and shared humanity. Strangers smiled at one another, nodding in approval. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves, asking questions about what had just transpired. And the tourist, still gripping James's hand, whispered, "Thank you." It was clear that this encounter would leave a lasting impression, not just on the individuals involved, but on everyone who bore witness to it. What had started as a reckless act of provocation had blossomed into a lesson in humility, empathy, and the enduring power of choosing understanding over anger. The handshake between Corporal James Calloway and the tourist lingered for a moment longer than expected, not because either man was reluctant to let go, but because it symbolized something far greater than themselves. It was a gesture of reconciliation, a bridge built across a chasm of misunderstanding. As their hands parted, the tourist stepped back slightly, his face still flushed with emotion, but now softened by gratitude. The crowd, sensing the significance of the moment, erupted into spontaneous applause. It wasn't loud or disruptive, just a gentle, heartfelt clapping that seemed to echo the collective sentiment. This is what humanity should look like. James turned slightly, addressing not just the tourist, but the entire square. "We all make mistakes," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had captivated everyone earlier. "What matters isn't the mistake itself, but how we choose to grow from it. Today, you've shown courage by apologizing." He glanced at the tourist, who nodded sheepishly, clearly overwhelmed by the turn of events. "And I hope this experience stays with you, not as a memory of shame, but as a reminder of the importance of respect." The tourist wiped at his eyes quickly, trying to compose himself. I never meant to disrespect anyone, he admitted, his voice louder now, tinged with earnestness. I don't know what I thought. That maybe messing with you would be funny. Stupid, really. I didn't realize how much meaning there was behind everything. The uniform, the palace, your job. He gestured vaguely toward James, then the towering structure behind him. It's humbling, honestly. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. A young woman holding a travel guide whispered to her companion, "He gets it now. That's amazing." Nearby, an older couple exchanged knowing smiles, nodding approvingly at the exchange. Even the children, who moments ago had been giggling and pointing at the guards, stood quietly, their wide eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. James took another small step forward, breaking protocol just enough to create a sense of connection without losing his dignity. "Sir," he began again, his tone warm and encouraging, "you mentioned traveling here to see new things, to learn. Well, today can still be part of that journey. Let's take a moment to honor the history and pride of this place, together." The tourist blinked in surprise, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Together," he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. James nodded firmly, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Yes, together. Why don't you take another photo? One that shows respect for what this landmark represents." He gestured subtly toward the palace, its grandeur framed perfectly against the backdrop of the clear blue sky. "Pose however you like, but do it with intention. Show the world not just where you've been, but what you've learned." For a moment, the tourist hesitated, glancing uncertainly at the cameras still trained on him. Then, slowly, he straightened his posture, squared his shoulders, and walked over to stand beside James. The contrast between them was striking. The polished guard in his crimson tunic and bearskin hat, standing tall and proud, and the scruffy traveler in his leather jacket, looking more self-aware than ever before. Together, they faced the crowd, neither speaking nor moving, yet conveying volumes through their stance alone. Someone shouted from the sidelines, "Smile," and both men obliged, though James's expression remained subtle, a slight upturn of his lips that conveyed quiet satisfaction rather than exuberance. The click of cameras filled the air once more, capturing the unlikely duo in a way that felt symbolic of unity and growth. Strangers cheered softly, offering words of encouragement. "That's the spirit," one man called out, while a teenage girl held up her phone, showing her friends the photo she just snapped. "This is going viral for sure," she said excitedly. As the tourist stepped away from James, he extended his hand again, this time with genuine warmth. "Thank you," he said sincerely, his voice steady despite the lingering tremor of emotion. "Not just for forgiving me, but for teaching me something I won't forget." James shook his hand firmly once more, his gaze unwavering. "You're welcome," he replied simply, his tone implying that no further words were needed. The two men shared a final nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed in such an unexpected way. The crowd began to disperse slowly, buzzing with conversation about what they had witnessed. Some lingered to take photos of the palace. Others approached James respectfully to thank him for his grace under pressure. But the tourist remained nearby, watching James return to his post with quiet dignity. For the first time since arriving at the square, he truly saw the guard, not as a static figure or a subject of ridicule, but as a human. Word of the incident spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. By the end of the day, videos and photos from the square had flooded social media platforms, accompanied by captions like "A lesson in humanity" and "The guard who chose kindness." The video clips captured every detail: the tourist's provocation, Corporal James Calloway's calm response, the heartfelt apology, and the symbolic handshake that followed. Within hours, millions of people around the world were watching, commenting, and sharing the story. News outlets picked it up too, framing it as a rare moment of grace in an often divided world. Back at the palace, James remained unaware of the viral sensation unfolding online. His focus stayed on his duty, standing tall and resolute despite the whirlwind surrounding him. But whispers reached him eventually, first from fellow guards who teased him good-naturedly about becoming internet famous, then from officers congratulating him for representing their unit with such dignity. Even visitors to the square began approaching him cautiously, not to mock or provoke, but to express admiration. "You handled that beautifully," one woman told him, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for reminding us what true strength looks like." Meanwhile, the tourist found himself at the center of attention in ways he hadn't expected. Though initially embarrassed by his actions, he soon realized that the narrative wasn't just about his mistake. It was about redemption and growth. People praised him for owning up to his error and learning from it. Strangers messaged him online, thanking him for being brave enough to apologize publicly. One comment stood out: "Your humility made this moment unforgettable. We all need reminders like this sometimes." Inspired by the overwhelming support and the lesson he'd learned, the tourist decided to revisit the palace months later, this time with his family in tow. He wanted to show them where the life-changing encounter had taken place and thank James personally if given the chance. As they approached the square, now familiar yet somehow more meaningful, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling inside him. Would James remember him? Would he even be there? To his relief and surprise, he spotted James immediately. The corporal was stationed in the same spot, his posture as impeccable as ever. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There was no tension, no sense of unease, just quiet reverence as tourists moved respectfully around him, snapping photos and whispering stories about the guard who taught kindness. Summoning his courage, the man approached James, his wife, and 2 young children trailing behind him. When James recognized him, a flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by a faint smile. "Sir," he greeted warmly, his tone carrying the same calm authority that had left such an impression before. I came back," the tourist stammered, unsure how to begin. "To say thank you again, and to introduce you to my family." He gestured toward his wife and kids, who looked up at James with wide-eyed curiosity. "This is my wife, Sarah, and our kids, Emily and Jake." James nodded politely, bending down slightly to meet the children's gaze. "It's nice to meet you all," he said kindly, his voice softer now. Turning back to the tourist, he added, "I'm glad you returned. It takes courage to face something difficult head-on." The tourist swallowed hard, fighting back tears. "What you did that day, it changed me. I've thought about it every single day since. You didn't have to be so patient, so understanding, but you were. And because of that, I'm trying to be better, to think before I act, to treat others with respect, no matter how different they seem." His words resonated deeply with those listening nearby. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the reunion, and many nodded in agreement. One elderly visitor wiped away a tear, whispering to her companion, "This is what the world needs more of." James straightened slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Change starts with moments like these," he replied. "Not just for you, but for everyone who witnessed it. Each of us has the power to choose kindness over anger, understanding over judgment. That's how we build bridges." Moved by his words, the tourist extended his hand once more, this time with his entire family joining in. They posed for a photo together, a stark contrast to the first one taken months earlier. This time, there was no mockery, no tension, only gratitude and mutual respect. As the camera clicked, capturing the heartfelt moment, the tourist knew he'd carry this memory forever. Before leaving, he turned to James one last time. "If you're ever in my hometown," he said earnestly, "please let me know. I'd love to repay your kindness somehow." James chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Just keep spreading the lesson you learned here today," he said. "That's repayment enough."